sometimes even centuries if we're talking about things like equity and social justice. Social movements have peaks and valleys, highs and lows. The peaks and valleys usually occur right after some trigger incident, something so phenomenal or utterly disgusting that a heightened awareness is created for those inside and outside the movement. The movement gains momentum, and then slowly and gradually, momentum subsides. Those periods in time are the valleys and lows for a social movement, and the ebb and flow describes nearly every social movement in American history. And it also includes advocacy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. See, I've always said to my friend Steve Mona, I always thought of golf as a microcosm of sports, and therefore sports and golf are microcosms of American society. And it's my opinion that America does a really poor job of telling our history. Our stories are told with a biased slant, if told at all, with huge gaps that fail to capture the struggles of important people who kept the momentum going for social change, especially during the valleys and lows. The diversity movement in golf is eerily similar to the highs and lows of other social change movements. Some of the people in this room know this already. Some actually lived it. I've seen some legends who we have up here, but some do not, and I think they should. And for those who know the story, please bear with me a few seconds. I think that for people in my generation have a debt to pass some of this history along so that these stories can continue from generation to generation. So bear with me while I give a little context and some background that's helped lead this golf diversity movement to where we are today. I want to point out to the newbies in the room that we've been here before. We've had this unbelievable high before, these peaks before in the diversity movement. And there's 1,000 different reasons why the movement slipped back into the quiet period and diversity failed to move forward. Don't have time today to go all the way back to the United Golfers days, United Golfers Associations. Those times have been captured by great authors like Pete McDaniel, Ramona Harriet, the late doctors, Dr. Calvin Sinnett, Dr. Mikhail Johnson, both no longer with us today. Each of them captured the UGA era, which led to the rescinding of the PGA's Caucasian-only clause in 1961, finally allowing Charlie Sifford to compete in PGA-sanctioned events. That led to an emergence of a dozen or more black golfers to join the men's and women's circuit over the next decade. True to form, that momentum gradually subsided. I'll go blocks of 30 years. 30 years later, in 1990 to be exact, Shoal Creek Country Club in Birmingham, Alabama was to play host to the PGA Championship, one of golf's big four. While addressing a large group of media reps prior to the event, Hall Thompson, the founder of Shoal Creek, was questioned about rumors of exclusionary practices at the private club. Thompson was quoted as saying, and I quote, "We do not discriminate in every other area except blacks," close quote. Golf jumped from the back pages of the sports section to frontline headline news, and it created a firestorm of controversy. From that moment on and for the next 10 years, the golf movement gained historic momentum, climbed greatly, and once again, it subsided. And despite all the noise and positive momentum that came from that era, data suggested little to no increases in diverse participation, jobs, or economic opportunities. Fast forward another 30 years, from 1990 now to 2020. And every person in this room can recall where they were May 25th, 2020, when George Floyd was brutally murdered in the streets of Minneapolis. Video captured it. It played across on televisions across the world. This time, the despicable act was bigger than sports, bigger than America itself. It struck at the core of life and death, of decency and humanity, and ripped off bloody scabs of social injustices embedded in the fabric of our society. A world was shaken, and the movement for racial reckoning and social justice erupted as microcosms of America, golf and sports had no choice but to align itself with this powerful social and cultural movement. And now here we are again, with an opportunity of a lifetime to move diversity, equity, and inclusion forward. And if you're hearing my voice in this room, I don't care if you're black, white, Latino, male, female, able-bodied, disabled-bodied, we got to get it right this time. If we know that there are peaks and valleys in history and we know that they gradually subside, we can't let it subside this time. It's the right thing to do. We got to push it through this time once and for all. Now, I said earlier that true champions to the cause never stop working, and a lot happened in golf during that 30-year gap between Shoal Creek and George Floyd. So before we jump forward and capitalize on this movement, and going forward, I want to recognize and bring awareness to an unsung hero, one who I consider an unsung hero, who kept our movement going when it was quiet. And his name is Steve Mona. Steve, come up on stage with me, please. Steve Mona is one of the most respected individuals in golf. He's the former CEO of the Georgia State Golf Association, former CEO of Golf Course Superintendents, former CEO of the World Golf Foundation. He's been a huge part of the happenings, particularly in the quiet years, and I thought that telling a little bit about the past resurgences and quiet times and recognizing my friend would be a good way to start today before we move into the present and the future. So Steve, you were part, or you joined slightly after 1990 in the Shoal Creek incident. One of the key things that happened at that time was the appointment of John Merchant to the USGA Executive Committee, the first black to serve in that capacity. Tell us your relationship with John Merchant and some of the things that happened thereafter.
Sure. So just excuse me for 1 second. That speech was too good to let go unnoticed, right? So let's hear from Mike Cooper. Yeah, so when Shoal Creek occurred, I was the executive director of the Georgia State Golf Association, so I was in the next state over. And so a lot of attention was posed at us, undoubtedly. And so the good news is that we already had 2 initiatives underway at that time. Excuse me. So when I arrived in 1983, the Georgia State Golf Association was an association only of private clubs and only of men, believe it or not. And so the 2 things that we did was we first opened the organization to women and opened the organization to public golf courses. And I will tell you, just by doing that, the complexion of the organization changed dramatically, as you can imagine. From a competition standpoint, our tournaments started to look different, our committees started to look different, ultimately our board started to look different. So that's what we did in that time in Georgia. As it relates to John Merchant, so I met John Merchant for the first time at the 1994 National Minority Summit that was held, or it actually was called the National Minority Golf Symposium. And the way I would describe John in terms of my relationship with him was he was wise, he was encouraging, he was fun to be around, but he also held you accountable, let me tell you. And I'll tell a story in a few minutes how he held me accountable for something, which turned out pretty well. So we became fast friends, and John really became like an uncle to me. And so that was the extent of our relationship back then. The other thing that occurred at that time, so at the 94 National Minority Golf Symposium, one of the outcomes was the creation of the National Minority Golf Foundation. And I think many of you in the room would probably remember Lou Horn, the late Lou Horn, who was the first president of that organization. followed by the late Barbara Douglas, who chaired it for a number of years. So I became a board member of that organization, I think in 97 or 98, and eventually it was taken over by the World Golf Foundation, where I later came several years after that. The other thing that happened around that time that I think is important to keep in mind was the creation of the first tee. The first tee's evolved. It's 25 years old now, in its 26th year. But when it started, make no mistake about it, it was focused on bringing golf to people who otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to be introduced to the game. So almost by its nature, it was focused on a diverse audience. And Tim Fincham, who was commissioner of the PGA Tour at the time, when he announced it, prior to the announcement, he had a small meeting with the heads of all the allied organizations. I was now at the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. And Tim said to all of us, he said, look, we're not expecting you to write checks, but what we'd like for you to do is figure out a way that your organization can assist the first tee. So we took that to heart, and so we ended up hiring a diversity officer at the GCSAA who not only interfaced with First Tee, but also helped us with our first diversity program at GCSAA. This would have been 98, 99 in that time frame. So apropos to what Mike's talking about, a lot's been going on for a lot of years. So now I wanted to fast forward to the World Golf Foundation. I know this is a long answer to a short question, Mike, but he gave me the podium, and I just think it's appropriate under the history of understanding where we came from. So 2008, I joined the World Golf Foundation. The first thing that happened, actually, Mike doesn't take credit for this, but Mike Cooper spent a year researching the state of diversity in the game and business of golf and produced a report that we presented to the board in 2009. And from that, we conducted a diversity summit in 2010. Bill Crouch, who then was the president of Georgetown College, helped to organize it. The late Franco Harris attended it. Renee Powell, who's been a champion of this for so many years, was there. She's the one that brought Franco. And from that, we created what was called the Diversity Task Force in 2011. Mike ended up being the chair of that. We broke into 4 committees. It's interesting to see when you created the committees for Make Golf Your Thing, kind of the parallel. So we had, here they were. So we had careers, suppliers, recreational golf, and competitive golf. So pretty similar. So that was kind of affirming to see how you organize Make Golf Your Thing. A lot of people stepped up, and I think they're almost all in this room in leadership roles. So Mark Lowry stepped up, Craig Kirby, who I see, there's Craig, Jim Beattie, Gina Rizzi right here, all took on leadership roles in that. And Mike is right, that was a completely volunteer outfit. We basically did it with no budget, or really nothing, literally, and did, I think, some pretty good things. Also around that time, I was introduced to a fellow by the name of Ken Bentley. A lot of you will know Ken. He was starting what at the time was the Advocates Tour, I believe, now the Advocates Professional Golf Association. And one of the first things we did was we introduced him to Ty Vota and Charlie Zink at the PGA Tour. And the PGA Tour, and I don't think this is very well known, actually made a pretty substantial ongoing commitment to the advocates back then. And since then, it's taken off like a rocket ship. But that was good on the part of Charlie and Ty that they stepped up like that and supported Ken and the advocates. Okay, so back to John Merchant. So this is at the the Black Golf Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Tampa, and John is inducted. I'm in the audience, and John gives an eloquent speech. I mean, he was a great orator. And towards the end, might have been the end of the speech, he said, basically, I would not do it justice how well he articulated it, but he basically said, look, we've got this rich heritage and there's no place for it. And we've got this World Golf Hall of Fame, but you wouldn't even know there was an African American that played golf hardly to go in the World Golf Hall of Fame. So I was sitting in the audience, didn't say anything. So a year later, at that same conference, I made the announcement that we were going to build an exhibit at the World Golf Hall of Fame, and in 2014 we did. And it was called Honoring the Legacy, a Tribute to African Americans in Golf. So we met John's challenge. That wasn't the only reason that we did it, but because it was the right thing to do, apropos to what Mike was saying before. The PGA Tour, the PGA of America, and the USGA put forth the financial resources to make that exhibit work. The late Charlie Sifford was there. It was a great evening. Pete McDaniel, who Mike already referenced, was there. He was an advisor on the project. A fellow by the name of Mario Chiodo from Oakland, California, built a special sculpture. It was called the DNA of a golf swing. It's 13 golf swings. The first golf swing was John Shippen's. The 13th was Tiger Woods. But the 14th is left open, and that's yet to come. So I was asked earlier today, with the World Golf Hall of Fame moving, what's going to happen to the exhibit? I'm not in that loop anymore of decision-making, but my sense is it will make the journey, too, to Pinehurst. I certainly hope so. And
I just heard someone say it's coming.
I'm sorry?
The sculpture's coming to the new Hall of Fame.
Oh, super. Great. Excellent. Good. Glad to hear it. And the other thing that took place, and these are very much behind the scenes, but they bear being communicated. In 2017, we started what's called the Future Leaders workshop. We brought in about 24 or so future leaders, both from a gender perspective and an ethnicity perspective. A lot of them have gone on to leadership roles in golf. Steve Schloss, who was the chief people officer at the USGA at the time, helped put that on. And then we did a diverse suppliers workshop, and Gina Rizzi, who's right here, led that. So apropos, Mike, to what you're saying, a lot's taken place. There's a lot more to do. We can talk about that in a minute, but that's the answer to my question, your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't walk away yet, though. See, so I asked Steve to speak at the opening here, and then I had a feeling. He's such a humble guy. I knew he would gloss over some of the things that he's been involved in. So I said, how about if I kind of prod you along? He said, yeah, okay, whatever. Talk a little bit about National Golf Day, which you played a huge part in.
Yeah, so National Golf Day actually goes back to 2005 and Hurricane Katrina, believe it or not. So when Katrina roared through New Orleans and the Gulf Coast, Congress passed a disaster relief legislation that allowed businesses impacted by the hurricane to essentially receive, on a tax-exempt basis, assistance from the federal government to rebuild. But golf courses were excluded, as we found out, along with casinos, massage parlors, liquor stores, and tattoo parlors. So I ask anyone, do we belong? And with all due respect, they're all legal businesses, okay? But that is not a group that I think we should be part of. So Joe Steranka, who was the CEO of the PGA of America at the time, called the meeting. We met in the Atlanta airport. It was the CEOs of GCSA, where I was at the time, National Golf Course Owners Association. Mike Hughes was the CEO then. And the Club Managers Association of America, Jim Singerling was the CEO at the time. And at that meeting, we decided that we needed to come together as the organizations that were focused at the facility level and create some sort of an entity to lobby on behalf of the collective interest of the game. Because a lot of the organizations in golf have their own legislative effort, but there was not a collective one, and that's what we did there. So that's what later became known as We Are Golf, now known as the American Golf Industry Coalition. And so from that, we created National Golf Day. So the first National Golf Day was in 2008. It was a small group, maybe, I don't know, 30, 40, maybe 50 people at the most. But we had the top people in golf. Tim Fincham was there, for instance, so it was a good start. So from there, it's grown now, and it'll take place again after a COVID hiatus later this year in May. There'll be in the neighborhood of about 250 people there over a 2-day period of time. So that was important for the golf industry. But the piece I wanted to mention, I think Mike's getting at, was in 2017, we were able to get a meeting with the leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus. And we met. It was really pretty cool, actually. We met, and the Speaker of the House has a whole suite of offices in the Capitol, and it's up in that dome, basically. And Jim Clyburn at the time was the majority whip, so he was number 3 in Congress at the time. So he invited us up into his kind of inner sanctum, so to speak. So we met in a conference room with Congressman Clyburn. Cedric Richmond was also there. He was the congressman from Louisiana, but he went on to a big role in the Biden White House. So pretty good day for us, I would say, Dr. Cooper. So take it on from there.
So, okay, so last, we've gone past. I want you to just, a couple of words on present. the Make Golf Your Thing and the future of diversity in golf. In your opinion, where are we doing? What's the opportunity here?
Okay. So I would guess you would think this would come from me, but I'm really bullish on the future. I think, but I also say to what Mike said, or reinforce what he said, we've got to capitalize on this momentum that we have right now. The first thing I'd like to do is thank Seth Waugh, the CEO of the PGA of America, Jay Monahan, the commissioner of the PGA Tour, and Mike Wan, who at the time was commissioner of the LPGA Tour, now the CEO of the USGA, because they got together pretty soon after the George Floyd murder and essentially gave the impetus to what's now called Make Golf Your Thing. So it would not have happened without those three, no question about it. So that's number one. Number two, I also want to thank those three, plus Molly Marcoux Samaan, who became commissioner of the LPGA after Mike went to the USGA. They're putting substantial money into this, and that's not disclosed, nor should it be, but it's substantial. And not only that, they're essentially deputizing a number of their executives, and there's several in this room, to take their time away from their day job, so to speak, to work on this effort. And without that, this doesn't go anywhere either. So congratulations to those three, or four really, for making that happen. Because what happened as a result of that is a lot of other big brands in golf got on board. You see, going all the way back to 2008, 9, 10, that we had a great group of committed leaders, but we were never able to get the leaders of the major organizations behind it. It didn't mean that they didn't agree with it or didn't support it, but it just wasn't a priority from a funding perspective. But now it is, so that's fabulous. There are several people. I don't want to start a whole roll call here, but there are a few people that I want to recognize that have been part of this. One is Stephen Hamlin with the American Junior Golf Association. There's another person that's a quiet leader. He's been all in on this really since, gosh, Mike, pretty much the start or close to it. Yeah, absolutely. So he doesn't get enough credit for it. I also want to give kudos to, they're both here, Sandy Cross and Neera Shetty, the co-chairs of Make Golf Your Thing, to Andrew East here. Andrew is kind of the administrative body behind it, if you will, and doing a great job keeping all the elements alive and moving forward. And here's what I really like about it. I love the focus about it. So it's really three things. It's really easy to remember. So we want to make golf your game, make golf your career, make golf your business. Very easy to remember, very focused. I also, since I've been involved in one specific area for a number of years, I wanted to mention that. And I wanted to specifically call out Ted Logan with the PGA of America and their support for what's now the Make Golf Your Thing directory. So your only homework from this little address here is go to makegolfyourthing.org. If you are a grassroots program recipient, we want your programs in the directory. And let me tell you what it is. The easiest way to think about it, we're trying to create the Airbnb of golf, or the Expedia of golf, or the Open Table of golf. Think of any of the big aggregator sites, but a place where someone could come and get information on programs, coaches, and events in their area that relate to wherever they are in their journey. So if it's a 13-year-old girl who's never played golf that lives in Dallas, it's going to be one set of events and coaches. If it's a 17-year-old boy in Atlanta, Georgia, who's played a little golf, it's going to be a different set. That's the idea. We've got about 10,000 events in there now. We want to increase that at least 10x going forward. So if you're a grassroots grants recipient, and if you haven't entered your programs into the directory, please see Mike Cooper. I have to leave right after this, but Mike's got a bunch of my cards, or he can connect you with me, because we want to get you in to that directory. And we think it's to your benefit to do that as well. So just a few other thoughts here, Mike. First of all, so why am I optimistic about the future of golf in DE&I? Because I see things happening. I see Fred Perpall will be the first black president of the USGA next month. That's a 126-year-old organization. That's seismic. It really is. I mean, just the optics of that, the significance of that is considerable. So that's happening. But I say this, the key to this going forward is that continued support, funding and executive level support of the leaders in the golf industry. And I hope that the Jay and Seth and Mike and Molly will see to it that they continue this, to write those big checks and to allow so many of their executives, like we see in the room here, the time to carry forth on this. And my hope, and I said this earlier today, my hope one day is that we don't need to have this, that it's just part of the way that the golf industry does business, and you don't really have to call it out if that's how you do things. And that's really, whether that happens in my lifetime, excuse me, I don't know, but that's where I'd like to see it end up. So I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts. They're very eclectic, but they're thoughts nonetheless. The first is, people of a certain age, like my age, will remember the late Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts. He was the Speaker of the House for a number of years. And he famously made the quote that all politics is local. And so I maintain that as it relates to DE&I, it all happens at the local level. That's why those grassroots grants programs are so important. That's why reaching out to people where they are to get involved in the industry from a career standpoint or supplier standpoint is so important. So it's great to have the national kind of air cover, so to speak, but it has to happen at the local level, and we need to empower people and get them the resources so that they can make it happen there. The second is, those that know me know I'm a big sports fan, and I like to talk in sports analogies. My wife once told me that when you do that, you turn off about 50% of the room, but anyway. But I listen to her mostly. But anyway, I couldn't resist this one. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, so even though I don't live there anymore and haven't for a number of years, I'm a San Francisco 49er fan. All right, we got some Niner fans here. Sorry. All right. So the Niners this year, so I'm getting to my point here. The 49ers this year, the second game, they lost their first-string quarterback. About the 8th game of the season, they lost their second-string quarterback, who was their starting quarterback from the year before. So now they're down to their third-string quarterback, who, by the way, was the last person taken in the draft last year. And so there's a lot of hand-wringing going on, what's going to happen. We have Super Bowl aspirations. We're down the tubes now. Well, he's proceeded to go 7-0 as the starting quarterback, and 8-0 if you count the game he came in, which was most of the game. So he's undefeated. So why do I tell that story? And I go back to something you said, Mike. You said, I don't know if it was this gathering, but a similar one, give somebody a chance. Give someone that doesn't look like you a job. Give them a chance. Let them be a supplier to you. You know, in so many cases, we just think only one person can do this, or if I don't hire this person, the building's going to fall down. And look, I'm not creating any kind of analogy between a third-string quarterback and people that don't have a chance. Don't get me wrong. But what I am saying is, a lot of people can do a lot of jobs if they get a chance. So that's the moral of that story. And then my final thought is, and probably all of you know this, but 99.9% of our DNA is identical from person to person. So look around this room, 99% of our DNA is exactly the same. It's only 0.01% of our DNA is what makes us different. So what unites us is so much more than what divides us. So just keep that in mind as well. And let's just keep that in mind as we build a great industry focused on bringing people into the game as we should. Thank you.
I'm a little emotional, excuse me. You know, let me collect myself. A message, a lot of messages there, Steve, Mona, thank you. I will say to the younger people in the crowd, you never know where your biggest support is going to come from. This man was my biggest supporter ever, the most unlikely source. So when people reach out to you, take it. When people who know what they're talking about tell you something, listen. You don't have to do it, but consider it. Thanks, my man. Big time. Big time. All right, I'm back. Okay, I'm back. And we're ahead of time, so it's a good thing. So we covered the past. I just thought it was important to have a little bit of talk about the past and that we've been at the highs and lows before, and that from here on now, let's just keep it at the high. Let's keep it at the high. And now we're going to move into the present and then the future.